So in this video, we'll be giving like little clips, little sketches of what the creation story may have looked like. Probably not the most accurate because it's us, but after every clip, I'll be giving a little explanation on the differences between the biblical creation story and the Quran story. So just to give you a little bit of information before we start the video, so you know what's going on. Yep, that's all. So for the first one, there's some key differences to begin. The Bible describes a clear sequence for each day of the creation week. So like every single day there is something that is happening. It's very clear, very straightforward for the most part. But importantly, the Big Bang is excluded from this narrative. It never mentions the Big Bang. The only way it could have even been put in there is if it was talked about when the Bible talks about how God created the sun with like let there be light, which is the video you just saw, and then like the whole universe, but that's not really included at all. There's no even allusion to a Big Bang in the biblical version. But the Quran importantly has no real clear details. It follows a 6-day creation week, but does not show any details of what those days may have looked like, and it actually does allude to a Big Bang, which most religions don't really do that when talking about a creation story. So I think it's an important fact to put in there that the biblical version does not include a Big Bang, but has clear sequence of events, and then the Quran does not have a clear sequence of events, but does include something that somewhat alludes to the Big Bang. Importantly, Genesis provides a unified description of the creation story, so you only hear about the creation story really in Genesis. It is the first chapter of Genesis is the creation story and the story of original sin and all of that. And while the Quran actually includes fragments of the story in numerous passages across 114 chapters, so there's not one clear part of the Quran that is dedicated to the creation story. It's spread out across chapters. Importantly, as I mentioned before, the story shares a similar trend of a 6-day week, and God creating the world himself those 6 days, and then the 7th day to rest. One similarity between the scriptures include the creation of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are both mentioned, Adam and his wife are both mentioned, but there are still some really clear differences. In the Bible, man and the animals were created vegetarian, so there is no death or suffering in the original creation. There is no death and suffering up until they sinned. But the Quran shares a little bit of a different story where there was somewhat death and suffering. Animal was created for man to eat. In the first, it's mentioned that cattle was the first animal to be created for a man to eat. Also, the Bible mentions that man was created naked, but was not ashamed up until he committed sin. But in the Quran, it does speak of Adam and his wife nakedness becoming apparent to them after they sinned, which is just like the Bible. They don't realize it, they're not aware of it up until they sin, but it is implied that they are wearing some kind of clothing prior to their fall. So they were covered somewhat, they were aware of their nakedness, when Adam and Eve, in the biblical version, were not aware of it at all up until they sinned. On the subject of the fall of Adam and Eve, the story is pretty similar with the way it is laid out. There's the obvious presence of sin. Sin is a huge theme in the creation story. It's basically the whole gist. The forbidden trees mentioned, where like there's a forbidden fruit that man cannot eat. That's mentioned in both stories, and the presence of the devil is both mentioned in both of the stories. Importantly, though, the devil in the Quran is simply depicted as the devil himself. He is not shaped into any other type of creature or anything. He is the devil, and there's something else to it. But in the Bible, it depicts him as a snake or a serpent. In the Quran, Adam and Eve are created in paradise, which is not on earth, so it is something outside of earth where they are created, but and they are banished to earth after their fall. But in the Bible, the Garden of Eden is on earth, but they are banished outside to another part of earth when they sin. Lastly, some important factors. The Quran and the Bible both mention the 6-day creation week. Even though the Quran actually does allude to it being more like 1,000,000 years, when the creation story in the Bible depicts it really just as 6 or 7 days. And they both mention the 7th day for the rest of God and also to be depicted as the rest for the people. That's why there's a 7th day week in both religions, and why the Sabbath is also somewhat done in both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In some form, in all 3 religions, there's some form of the Sabbath where there's a day of rest and worship. Lastly, the Bible believes that all things were created through Christ and for Christ, that Christ is pre-existent to creation, but the Quran believes that Jesus Christ was a created being. He was not before creation, and they believe that just as Adam was of God, Jesus was of God. He was created of dust. Just as Adam was, he is just human, or not just as human, but more that he was created as any other being would be. He was not before creation. He was not before Adam. And here are some final thoughts. I know you were tired of seeing my face. I am almost done. Okay, so I think it's important to wrap up because I mentioned a lot of differences and not as many similarities. What's really important about the story is that the similarities are like vital, like presence of sin, presence of the devil, Adam and Eve. Those are the 3 things that make the story. Those are the important aspects of the story that are shared across both of the creation stories. Even though there may be some small little differences in those pieces, they are still overall similar in that way. And what I think the differences that I mentioned in all the other talks, what do they tell us? I think it's just the way that religion changes over time, how they change in storytelling, how they change in different regions, and that's really why they are different. Just the way they were depicted, the language used, the people that are hearing them, the people that are telling them, people who are writing them, all of those differences that even though they may seem small, like different regions, different cultures see stories as different, see different normalities as either important or unimportant. So I think overall it's just a matter of who is hearing them, what type of people, where are they from. That's what makes the story different. And as long as they are getting the message of the creation story, which is about original sin, which is about the creation of human beings, which is about the love God has for the beings he created, those important messages are still being told, even with these minor differences of exactly how the world was created, exactly how Adam and Eve were depicted, exactly how the devil was depicted. All of those little details really don't matter, and they're just being told differently because of who is hearing them. And that's really what really matters, is that they're hearing the overall message of sin, of love, of overall the creation of beings, and that's really what's vital to the story.